The chain stitching, I'm going to show you two different options. There's a chain stitch and then there what people call the reverse chain stitch. I typically use both depending on what I want, what I'm needing. I'm just going to explain the difference between the two and how they work. So obviously the direction will be one part, but the technique is another as well. So I'm going to start with just the regular chain stitch. So you create similar to a lazy daisy, which we'll work on later. It's, and some people call it a detached, or they call a lazy daisy a detached chain stitch. So if you see a detached chain stitch, it is also called a lazy daisy. So start by creating, taking your stitch and putting 2 stitches down side by side, and then we'll come up a stitch length away, and then you come up through that loop. So you're creating a loop and going down through or up, creating kind of a loop on that. And then I'm going to put my needle back down through that loop to create my next chain. Bringing my needle back up another stitch length away through the loop and then down. So your first one, you create the loop by doing 2 stitches, creating the loop. The second parts, you're just doing but you, 1 stitch down, another stitch up through the back, and then weaving that loop over it. I like to keep my finger inside of the loop, so I put my fingers on here, holding it, going back down through there. And continuing the same technique throughout the whole thing. So we're just going to pull it down nice and tight, and then that's when, once I've pulled it tight, is when I go back down through the loop with my needle to close or create the next loop, sorry. So you finish a loop, and then to create your next loop, you're going back through that loop again. You want to get inside the chain, which sometimes once you've pulled it down nice and tight can be harder to do. So this is another one that creates like a nice wide stitch, but it also works really nicely with angles and curves. Okay, so our last chain, I'm gonna come up at the end through my loop, and to finish your chain, you're essentially just tacking that last one down. Okay, so it creates like a little stitch at the end. Right here you can see I actually wish I'd come a little bit closer together with the end of my chain, so make that a little bit closer together, just to create, like these ones you can see they almost overlap. This one almost seems a little too wide open, and that's okay. It's just, you know, something you learn as you go, and sometimes you make the mistake and you can fix it. Okay, so I'm going to grab my pink and I'm gonna do my reverse chain stitch, or my other technique for this chain stitch. It is technically called the reverse chain stitch, but it is just another version. So I'm gonna grab my 4 strands, sorry, down here, my 4 strands, and I'll do that there. Okay, so here's where it's gonna get a little confusing. If I want the chain to go in the same direction as this one here, so look exactly the same, I'm gonna start my chain at the opposite side. If I start it over here, it will be in reverse to this direction. So I'm gonna start it over here so you can see what it looks like, but it will be the opposite. If you want it to look identical to the one up there, you would start over here, if that makes sense. You'll see maybe once I get started, but I'm gonna start at the side that we've been starting the whole time so you can see how it's actually the reverse. So I'm going to make a tiny little stitch. Okay, as small as I can, while knowing I still want to get my needle underneath of that. And what that is meant to symbolize essentially is this little stitch here. So then I will come up right here through my fabric and then weave myself underneath that little stitch and then back down through the same spot. Now, I am literally doing the exact reverse of this. So I had my little end stitch. I went down through here instead of coming up through here. So this would be when I'm coming down through my loop. So you're coming up through the fabric, going underneath your chain, and then down. And you are creating an exact reverse of the chain above and doing essentially the stitching in reverse, right? Because instead of coming up through the loop, you're going under the loop once it's already down. You know what? I don't even know. It just boggles. It's almost confusing to my brain, but so then meeting up at the end there, closing my chain, and then coming up a stitch length away, going underneath, oops, and closing it. Now, this is a much easier, in my opinion, way to do the chain stitch. The reverse chain stitch is not as finicky with pulling the loops closed. Yeah, you get like a really nice even loop. And if you want it to go in the direction, you would just start over here and then it would end up exactly the same as the chain stitch. So that's the part that I probably have the most difficulty wrapping my brain around, is which direction to start. But like which do I start at the end of my section or the beginning? So when you're working in a straight line, obviously, you have a starting point. If you're doing a circle, it's different. But if you were doing a stem and you were starting at the very bottom of your stem, say, for example, our practiced stitch, I'll finish this and then I'll give you the example. So you're going to go down, and then to finish this stitch, I'm going to go a little bit. I'm going to do one more. To finish this stitch, you just put your stitch down through there and you're done. So the end of this one looks exactly the same as the end of this one looks like, start of this one looks exactly the same as the end of this one, and the end of this one looks exactly the same as the start of that one. So they are fully reversed.